The day the camera arrived, it didn't announce itself. It came in a hand, the daughter's small, decisive, the way a hand becomes when it believes it is saving someone. She stood at the foot of bed 4 and lifted her phone just above the rail, silent, as if silence made it harmless. I noticed it while checking the vasopressor titration. Her father, Mr. Cole, lay sedated, a pale geometry of tubing and tape. The room had that tidy hum of machines behaving. The ventilator traced its patient brand of reassurance. The monitor offered green honesty. I had already done my first round of questions, introduced myself, explained the sedation scale, the plan for the day. She had nodded then. "I'm keeping notes," she said, tapping a paper notebook. When the phone appeared, the notebook remained closed on her chair. "We don't allow filming in the ICU," I said, keeping my voice the same tone I use for explaining how to press the call button. "It's for everyone's privacy. I'm filming my father," she replied, voice low but unmoving. "Not anyone else, that's still everyone else's sound, and sometimes their faces," I said. "Our policy is clear, it's for his safety." The phone didn't waver. "Last time we were in a hospital, they missed something. We had nothing to prove it. This time I'm documenting. There are arguments you can answer with law, and there are arguments you can only answer with time." I could quote policy. I could call security. I could step into the hallway and ask the charge nurse to be the villain so I could remain the friend. I could also see what she was watching for, the way her eyes pinned themselves to the tubing, to the numbers, to the slow rise and fall that had replaced her father's effort. "Would you put it down for now?" I asked, "while I talk you through everything that's running, and why?" She hesitated, then lowered the phone to her lap, still recording, lens tilted to the ceiling. I chose not to point that out. Some small victories don't need witnesses. "This line is norepinephrine," I said. "We're at a low dose. The goal is to keep his pressure steady while he fights the infection. The ventilator is doing the work because his lungs are tired. The sedation keeps him comfortable so he won't fight the tube or panic." I trace each line with my finger like a teacher with chalk. "We check him every hour. We check labs. We turn him every 2 hours to protect his skin. We suction when he needs it, not when it's dramatic." She listened the way people listen when they have already arrived at a verdict and are collecting evidence to justify it. "How will I know you're doing all of that?" she asked. "You won't," I said. "You'll have to trust us, and we'll have to earn that trust 1 hour at a time." Her mouth tightened at the word trust, as if it were a promise we were late to. The phone lifted again, not much, just enough to claim a part of the room. When I stepped out to update the resident, I found the charge nurse by the board. "Bed 4, I said. "Daughter is filming. Policy is policy." She didn't look up from the census. "We enforce it. Security?" I asked. She glanced at me then, reading whatever soft calculus I was scribbling behind my face. "Start with a reminder. Offer to write things down. If she refuses, we escalate. In the next hour." The team did everything teams do when the plan is working. We adjusted settings, we drew blood, we charted in rectangles that tried to contain the day. The daughter filmed in small, stubborn arcs. The drip chamber, the ventilator waveforms, her own hand on the blanket as if contact needed proof. When the respiratory therapist came to suction, the daughter stood and moved for a better angle. "Please," I said. "No filming during procedures. It's just his mouth," she said. "It's also his dignity." I lowered the side rail and helped the therapist position. We worked quickly. The daughter watched with her phone at chest height, lens dark. I thought about asking her to show me her screen to confirm, then swallowed the impulse. Policing technology is a little like chasing smoke. At noon rounds, the attending asked for updates. I presented the events. When I mentioned the filming, he sighed the way people sigh when something is both unsurprising and unfixable. "Policy is policy," he echoed, then added. "And also see if there's a reason behind the reason." After rounds, I returned to bed 4 with a pen and an empty sheet of paper. "I'll write you a summary every 4 hours, I told the daughter. "Meds, vitals, changes. You'll have a record." She looked at the paper, then at me, as if measuring how much weight a page could possibly carry. Last time, she said, we left for an hour to shower. When we came back, he had aspirated. They said they had suctioned. They said they had turned him. They said a lot of things. We had no way to know what was true. This is the way I keep him safe. There it was the reason behind the reason. Not curiosity. Not intrusion. Grief dressed as vigilance. Tell me what happened, I said. She told the story like a person reciting a hex. The names were different. The floor was different. The machines had different stickers. But the story was the same story every hospital knows by another name. Something happened when no one was looking, and now the world has decided to look always. Let me show you something, I said when she finished. I pointed again, not at the devices this time, but at the small things. The tape at the corner of his mouth, the way it sat without tugging. The skin under the restraints unbroken. The angles of pillows leaving no red half-moons on his ears. The careful loop of lines away from the floor. These are the ways we are watching that may not look like watching. They matter. She lowered the phone to her lap fully this time. No one showed me that before. In the middle of the afternoon, a code was called to rooms down. It drew staff like gravity. Our hallway filled. The daughter stood quickly and pressed herself into the corner, phone against her chest. Bed 4's monitor stayed green. I glanced at my patient, at the numbers, at the ventilator's steady sermon. I could hear the compressions from room 6 as a soft thud, and with it the impulse every caregiver knows, to make myself into many. I need to step out for a minute, I told her. He's stable. If anything changes, the monitor will alarm, and I'll be back. I'll watch, she said. I know, I answered, before I let myself think about what that meant. The code down the hall ended the way some codes end, with people walking out quieter than they walked in. When I returned, the daughter was still in the corner, the phone off. She had a list in her notebook now. A question, she said, pointing. Why is his temperature down? We're targeting mild normothermia, I said. Fever feeds the burn. We're keeping him comfortable. And this, she said, tapping another line. Why did the ventilator beep 5 times? It beeps when it's reminding us it exists, I said. It's needy like that. If the waveforms change or the pressures climb, it tells us in a different voice. She considered that, then asked, almost shyly, how do you hear the difference? You hear it because you live here, I said. Like how you can recognize your father's cough at a party full of strangers. Toward evening, a conflict began to grow in the corner like weather. Her brother arrived. He carried the posture of someone who has made himself useful for months. He saw the phone and shook his head. Mom's right, he told her without hello. They said no filming. It's for Dad, she said, chin lifting. It keeps them honest. I'm not dishonest, I said, before I could decide to stay out of it. He looked at me then, startled not by my presence but by my voice. People forget the nurses hear themselves inside the stories being told about them. We're not accusing you, he said. We just don't want to be naive. I prefer careful to naive, I said. Careful means you ask questions. Naive means you stop listening to the answers. He smiled briefly. The temperature in the room dropped from argument to conversation. At shift change, I handed bed 4 to the night nurse, a woman who could hear 3 monitors and a whispered fear at the same time. I told her about the daughter's filming, the paper summaries, the notebook of questions, the brother's weather. I think if we give them a shape to put their panic in, I said, it might stop looking like a phone. I can be a shape, she said, tying her hair. Phones are terrible shapes. The next morning, Mr. Cole's labs looked kinder. The ventilator sighed less. The resident dared to say tomorrow like an invitation. When the daughter arrived, she kept her phone in her bag. I want to try something different today, she said, surprising us both. If I feel the urge to film, I'll write instead. If I feel like I'm not being heard, I'll say it out loud, even if my voice shakes. That's a good plan, I said. It works for me too. We went through the day with a new quiet. Questions still came, many of them, some sharp, none cruel. The brother brought coffee that tasted like apologies. We discovered the exact angle of the blinds that let the room seem less like a stage. We learned which alarms sang for attention and which for reassurance. We were all braver than the day before, in small, unphotogenic ways. On the third day, the attending talked about a spontaneous breathing trial as if the future were a place we could stand in. The daughter gripped the bed rail, not as if she were falling but as if she were bracing to stay. "If he wakes up," she said, "and he pulls the tube, and you hold his hands down, may I film that?" "You may be at the bedside," I said. "You may hold his hand. You may ask us to explain what we're doing. You may tell him he's safe. And when he wakes up enough to decide if he wants a camera near his face, you may ask him." She nodded. "That's fair." He woke the next morning like someone remembering a word. We lowered the sedation and the ventilator didn't complain. He blinked as if light had different vocabulary now. We explained where he was, what the tube was, what day it had become. He nodded slightly. When we extubated, the daughter cried without hiding it. He coughed, he grimaced, he listened. The daughter asked in a small voice, "Dad, can I show you some of the notes I took?" Not the video, the words. He looked at the notebook the way people look at the first thing handed back after an illness, as proof that life had been happening elsewhere and might come back here now. "Later," he rasped. "Tell me instead." She told him everything. The beeps that meant nothing, the ones that meant a little, the small tape victories, the turn schedules, the questions that became answers. She told him that she had wanted to make a record to protect him and that, in the end, talking had felt more like protection than filming. He listened and squeezed her fingers like a signature. The night before his transfer out of the ICU, she found me at the desk. "I deleted the videos," she said without preface. "Not because you asked, because I didn't need them anymore. I thought evidence would give me control. It just gave me panic." The notes felt like participation. It felt like care. "You did care," I said. "You gave him a witness. Sometimes that's the only medicine that works." She smiled then, small and human. "Thank you," she said, "for answering questions, for not making me choose between being a good daughter and a good visitor. We're on the same team," I said. We forget to say it out loud. After he left for the step-down unit, the room looked abruptly larger. We stripped the bed. We wiped what hands had touched. We reset the monitor to its blank stare. A new name would be printed above bed for by noon. The hallway carried on with its mix of sorrow and stern hope. 2 days later, I passed them by the elevator. Mr. Cole upright in a wheelchair, hair combed into the shape of a plan, the daughter walking beside him with no phone in her hand. She waved. He raised his fingers, a salute careless enough to be healthy. The elevator doors opened and closed on their own schedule. Back at the desk, a new admission lit up on the board. Another family. Another set of alarms to translate. Another reason behind the reason, waiting. I printed a fresh stack of those blank for our summaries and left them where everyone could see. In a place where machines never blink, it turns out the bravest thing any of us can do is look fully, with our whole faces, and then talk to one another until the need to record is replaced by the right to remember. The interpreter phone died in the middle of a sentence about fear. It was the gray handset we keep on the wall, a device that promises fluency on demand. Dial a number, choose a language, conjure a bridge. I was halfway through explaining the plan for the afternoon to Mrs. Alvarez when the line went quiet and the screen froze on a pixelated cheekbone that didn't belong to any of us. Her daughter, Sophia, was 14 in that way that is part steel, part apology. She stood up immediately. "I can do it," she said, tapping her chest. "Spanish is fine. I do it for my mom all the time. We were in bed 7. Pneumonia, high-flow oxygen, heart that argued with every effort. The plan was to place a central line and start vasopressors before the slope got too steep. Nothing about it was exotic. Everything about it required consent that meant something. "Our policy is to use a certified interpreter," I said, more gently than rules often deserve. "I'll call for the backup iPad." Sophia's eyes flicked to the monitor. then to her mother's face. She gets scared when people leave to get things, she said. If you tell me what to say, I'll say it. Mrs. Alvarez watched us with the patience people learn when rooms start filling with equipment. She spoke softly and quickly. The words reached me like birds, clear across a distance I couldn't cross alone. She squeezed Sophia's hand. Sophia answered in Spanish, then turned to me. She says she wants whatever will help her breathe. Okay, I said. Let's make sure she understands what that includes. I tried the wall phone again. No tone. I paged for the tablet. 10 minutes, the message read. 10 minutes is nothing in a grocery line and a lifetime in a room where a woman is measuring her air in teaspoons. The resident arrived with a respectful kind of hurry. He introduced himself in English, then looked to Sophia. Can you translate for me for a moment? He asked, already reaching for the consent form. I felt the familiar tug speed vs. precision, kindness vs. correctness, and all the small ways we let ourselves believe they are opposites. We're getting the interpreter, I said, loud enough to be true and quiet enough not to sound like a threat. Sophia lifted her chin. What do you need to say? She asked the resident, pen poised over the signature line the way small boats approach a dock. He explained the catheter, the risks, the benefits, and the clipped sentences medical people use when they are trying not to scare anyone. Sophia's Spanish slid over it all like a thin blanket. When he finished, she spoke to her mother for a longer time than the speech had lasted. Mrs. Alvarez listened. She looked at the ceiling. She nodded. She said something that made Sophia's mouth press itself into a new shape. She says okay, Sophia told us, then added, but no tube, no intubation? I asked. Sophia nodded, relieved to have the answer to something. The resident frowned at the evaluation note that did not yet contain this kind of line. Is that a firm no? He asked, or not now? Sophia looked at her mother again. They traded 6 words. She says no. I wrote it where it would be harder to forget. I also wrote, in a place no one would see, that the interpreter tablet was on its way. The procedure tray arrived. We cleaned the skin that would become a port. The resident draped and gloved. Sophia stood on the far side of the bed, holding her mother's hand and the room's piece in the same small grip. We were one pause away from the first puncture when the tablet appeared in the doorway, held by a breathless clerk with apology stamped across his forehead. Let's use it, I said, before the inertia of almost started pulled us past the point where correction feels like betrayal. Sophia stepped back, face flushing not with embarrassment but with the sudden permission to put a burden down. The interpreter answered on the second ring. Her voice filled the room with calm grammar. We introduced ourselves again, the way people do when the right language finally arrives. I said what we were doing and why. The resident repeated the risks and the benefits slower. Mrs. Alvarez asked 3 questions she had not asked before. One was about pain. One was about how long the line would stay. One was about the tube, the same, no, now wrapped in a story. When my husband was sick, she said through the interpreter, they put a tube while I was outside. When I came back, he couldn't speak. He died with plastic in his mouth. I don't want that for me. If I must die, I want to be able to say what I need to say. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when a person pulls a thread and you realize it was connected to the right thing all along. Do you want us to try the tube if it would be for a short time? I asked, to help you through the infection? Or do you not want it under any circumstance? She closed her eyes, opened them, looked at Sophia, who was looking at the interpreter screen like it was a window in a house she had been locked outside of. I don't want it, she said. No tube, we documented it properly. The resident talked through alternatives without the eagerness of a salesman. We placed the line. Sophia watched without filming, without translating, without being asked to be older than she was. Later, when the room had returned to the ordinary choreography of machines and charts, Sophia found me at the sink. Thank you, she said, surprising us both. For what? I asked. For making them wait. I always translate. At the clinic. At school. At the bank. Sometimes I don't have the right words. Sometimes I choose the easy ones because the hard ones take too long and the person on the other side is busy. Then I go home and I think maybe I changed what my mom wanted because I wanted to be done. She looked like 14 years minus each time she had been told she was so mature. I turned off the water and dried my hands slowly. You were protecting her, I said. I was protecting myself, she answered, honest in the way that keeps people from drowning. Mrs. Alvarez dozed, the tablet asleep on its stand like a new animal that had decided to be friendly. Her oxygen stayed steady. Her blood pressure obeyed the new math. The day thinned into evening. I brought Sophia a chair that didn't pretend to be soft. She took out a notebook, wrote the date at the top, and in tidy letters copied down the plan into languages, not because anyone told her to, but because writing it made it feel more real. That night, the covering physician called a family meeting. He wanted to be sure we had heard the no tube correctly, that it wasn't a reflex born from one bad memory. We dialed the interpreter again. Mrs. Alvarez's sister joined by phone from a kitchen that sounded like it had a clock. We went over everything one more time. The resident talked about high flow and bilevel support. The respiratory therapist explained what we would do if the number slipped. Mrs. Alvarez listened, patient as a bank queue. At the end, she said, "No tube, not angry, not scared, just a line drawn like a border around a life she still recognized as hers." Sophia watched me while her mother spoke. I thought she was looking for approval. Maybe she was looking for someone to promise that the next hour wouldn't ask anything impossible of her. Overnight, the numbers wandered like people who've forgotten the address they were walking toward. We adjusted, we coaxed, we kept our promises. At 4 in the morning, the monitor screamed for attention and then apologized with a sigh. By 7, the sun had found the sliver of window that belongs to every ICU room. Sophia returned with damp hair and a bag of fruit. She handed me an orange as if it were a receipt. "Better," I said, and meant it cautiously. She nodded at the tablet. "Can we call and tell my mom's sister?" she asked. "I want her to hear my mom say it herself again." Not from me, we called. The interpreter's voice arrived, rested and ordinary. Mrs. Alvarez said better in Spanish and better in English, trying both on like new shoes. She did not change her mind about the tube. Her sister did not try to change it for her. When the call ended, Sophia looked taller without moving. On the third day, we began to walk the oxygen down. Mrs. Alvarez took shallow, stubborn breaths that belonged to her. She ate ice chips with the reverence of a traveler tasting home water. The resident said the word floor without superstition. I wrote the discharge instructions for a body that was not leaving the hospital yet but wanted to remember that it could. Before transfer, the attending came by with his stack of things to sign. "Thank you for insisting on the interpreter," he said to me in the hallway, where praise feels safer. "I forget sometimes. Not the rule." The reason for the rule, it wasn't just the rule, I said. It was the room. He nodded and moved on to a pager that was already asking a different favor. Sophia packed a small bag for her mother: comb, lotion, the green cardigan that had smelled like their couch until the hospital took the smell out of it. She slid the notebook in on top. "When she gets to the floor," she said, not quite a question, "they'll keep using the interpreter." "They will," I said. "And if they don't, you can remind them." I wrote the interpreter line in block numbers on the whiteboard where no one could claim not to have seen it. At the elevator, Mrs. Alvarez took my hand. Her palm was dry and strong. "Gracias," she said, then tried again. "Thank you," she gestured to the tablet. "The woman in the phone, she was good. But also you." She touched her throat, then her chest. "You waited for my words. Your words were worth waiting for," I said. It was the kind of sentence that sounds like a card until you need it to be true, and then it is. 2 days later, I saw Sophia in the cafeteria line, buying something that tried to be breakfast. She waved me over, nervous like a person rehearsing. "My mom told me to tell you that she is breathing on her own." She says she is practicing English with the TV and Spanish with the nurses from Honduras and silence with herself. She says you can come visit if you want. I said I would. I did. When I stepped onto the floor that afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez was perched in a chair like a person who had remembered how to be vertical. The tablet sat across the room, asleep. We didn't wake it. Sophia translated a joke her mother made about the food and didn't translate the way her mother looked at her, which needed no help. Back in the ICU, the gray interpreter phone was working again, as if it had only needed a night to remember how to earn its keep. Still, I ordered another tablet for our unit and wrote a small note in the staff room. Language is part of vital signs. Don't guess. We borrow words from one another all day in a hospital. We borrow trust. We borrow time. The work is giving each thing back cleaner than we found it. Some days that looks like a line on a graph trending the right way. Some days it looks like a girl setting down a job that never should have been hers and picking up a different one. Daughter. The wristband said one thing, the screen said another, and the truth lived somewhere a person had once spoken it out loud. Bed 3 came from the emergency department just before noon, sedated, ventilated, the tidy chaos of a new ICU arrival. The chart opened to a legal name in blocky capitals and a scan of a driver's license that did not resemble the face I was taping the tube around. Same bone, different story. In the triage note, someone had typed, goes by Marina she her. The wristband still read the name from the license and the pronouns it assumed without asking. I paged registration to fix the banner, because names follow people around hospitals like shadows, and I have learned to sweep the floor before the sun changes. The registrar on the phone said the change would take a minute, which in hospital time means anywhere from now to when you stop caring. I wrote Marina on the whiteboard in the room, big enough that even our excuses would have to squint at it. When a person is intubated, the room fills with other people's verbs. We titrated, we suctioned, we adjusted, we watched. The vetting of lines and the choreography of monitoring took the first hour. The second hour belonged to the hallway. Mother at the desk, hands clasped, a friend with a backpack, a man who said partner and then said it again because he had learned the word often needs rehearsal in places with fluorescent lights. I brought them in one at a time, because too many eyes at once can make a room forget its patient. The mother went first. She stood at the foot of the bed and rubbed the rail like a worry stone. My son, she said, voice soft with an old habit. Your daughter, I said, and kept my tone the temperature of water that doesn't make you flinch. She looked at the monitor as if the numbers could adjudicate. The name on the bracelet is the legal one, I said. We're updating the chart to the name she uses. We'll print a new band. She never told me about this, the mother said. She told someone, I said, and nodded toward the triage note, the small act of telling made into evidence. When I stepped back into the hall, the man with the backpack was pacing in a short, efficient line. I'm Alex, he said before I could ask. I'm her partner. We've been together 3 years. I'm the one they called from her phone. Can I see her? Yes, I said, and watched his shoulders drop just enough to make space for breath. He put the backpack in the chair and went straight to the head of the bed, the place where people who know the person stand. He took Marina's hand around the lines without disturbing a single loop. Experience has a posture. She hates the tape on her cheeks, he told me. If there's a way to tuck it so it doesn't pull those tiny hairs near her ear. There is, I said, and retaped the tube the way he described, not because Alex had credentials but because he had a map. In the doorway, the friend hovered. We met in choir, he offered to the air. She sings alto now. You should hear her. I told him I would like to someday and hoped my voice sounded like a promise, not a sentence. Back at the desk, the registrar called. Banner updated, she said, satisfaction in her voice as if she had replaced a part in an engine and it purrs again. I printed a new wristband, cut the old one off carefully, and attached the one that belonged. Names are not trophies, they are tools. The right one fits. In the afternoon, the resident reviewed intubation notes and imaging. Pneumonia had walked in disguised as a cold and had set up camp like it meant to stay. The plan was antibiotics, lung protective ventilation, the patience that medicine often asks from people who do not owe it patience. We talked about sedation vacations and spontaneous breathing trials and keeping the blur of days from erasing the outline of a life. The mother returned with a plastic bag, the kind grocery stores apologize for now. Inside, a wallet, a phone with a cracked corner, a small notebook with a cover the color of salt water. I found these at her apartment, she said, eyes not quite meeting mine. I thought maybe you'd need them. We do not need wallets to run norepinephrine. We do not need notebooks to set ventilator alarms. But we need the parts of a person that tell us how to speak to them when we turn the sedation down and invite them back into the room. I opened the notebook. The first pages were grocery lists, chord progressions, a recipe for a soup that wanted cilantro, a sketch of a hand with careful attention to the knuckles. Near the middle, a single page headed "If Hospital," with 2 phone numbers, the words Marina, she, her, and Alex is proxy, underlined twice. Is that legal? The mother asked, reading my eyes. It helps, I said. There's a formal form. If she signed one, we'll find it. If she didn't, we still listen to the person she chose to tell us who she is. At 4, the social worker arrived like a person who has been invited to a fire and brought water and chairs. She sat with the mother and with Alex, and the hallway collected the sound of old griefs stepping on the backs of new ones. There were words like understanding and time and respect. There were words like my child and my partner that circled each other warily and then found a way to stand in the same sentence without pushing. In the evening, a float nurse came to help with turns. She read the banner out loud as she pulled on gloves. Marina, she, her, habit made her glance at the face, then the old wristband still visible on the counter because I had not yet thrown it away. But the ID says it's old, I said. The band is new. She nodded and we turned Marina with the care of people handling something both strong and breakable. When we were done, she went to the sink and apologized without making it a performance. Thanks for catching me, she said. I want to get it right. You did, I said. Getting it right is sometimes another name for letting someone correct you without making their day about you. Night brought the steady metric of ventilator cycles and the small, relentless labor of the ICU. The numbers trended in the way we tell families is encouraging. At 2 in the morning, Marina fought the sedation with the stubborn energy of a person whose body is remembering what awake feels like. We lightened the drip. We spoke her name the way you say, here, here, to someone waking from a bad dream. Her lids fluttered, her fingers moved with purpose, tugged once at the tape, then at the gown. I placed her hand on the blanket and she left it there, a compromise. By morning, we were ready to see what her lungs would do if we asked less from the machine. The respiratory therapist adjusted settings with the calm of a person who has argued with wind and learned to make it an ally. We watched, we waited, we gave her breaths room to be clumsy without calling them failures. When she tired, we let the ventilator carry more again. Opportunities are not ultimatums. Alex arrived with coffee that looked too black to drink, and the mother came with a bag of soup that hospitals are not supposed to allow but often do because soup believes in itself. We went over the plan. I said her name Marina enough times that the room wore it like a familiar sweater. At noon, a small administrative storm gathered at the desk. A clerk needed a signature. A policy wanted a box checked. Someone from a department whose door I have never seen asked for the legal name for a billing form. It's Marina, I said, and gave the medical record number that ties the name to the human, but on the insurance the voice began. It's Marina, I repeated, and wrote it in ink, because sometimes the right thing is a duplicate copy. In the late afternoon, a nurse from the floor stopped by. We heard about the name issue, she said, kind curiosity in her tone. What did you do about the mother? Sometimes families. She didn't finish because we both know how that sentence ends into many rooms. We gave everyone a job, I said. Alex holds the map. Mom holds the couch and the soup. We hold the medicine. And the name holds all of us in the same place. She smiled the way people do when a thing that sounded impossible turns out to be a list. We tried another wean early evening. This time Marina's breaths found a rhythm that looked like a person remembering how to be here. We extubated just before the kind of sunset ICU windows can only guess at. She coughed, she grimaced, she blinked. Her voice came out like a match being struck. She looked at Alex, then at her mother, then at me. "What name are you using for me?" she asked, and the room held its own breath the way rooms do when they know the next line matters. "Marina," I said, without echoing it as a question. She exhaled a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Good," she said. "We're already doing better than last time. I didn't ask about last time." She would tell me or she wouldn't. She closed her eyes and opened them again as if calibrating the amount of light her day could hold. The mother stood where mothers stand when they are holding 100 sentences behind their teeth. Alex took Marina's hand and tucked it under the blanket like you tuck a bird back into a pocket. "Do you want to see your notebook?" I asked. She nodded. I handed it over. She turned to the "if hospital" page, traced the underlines, then looked at Alex. "You kept it safe," she said, and he shook his head. "You did," he answered. "You wrote it." They spoke soft words then. "Not for me, not for charts." The mother wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and then laughed at herself, the way people apologize to their own faces for being human. "I brought soup," she said. "It is terrible. But it is from home." "Home sounds good," Marina whispered. The mother stepped closer, unsure of permissions and history and new grammar. "Hi me," Marina added, the Portuguese slipping out like a path that had never stopped existing. The social worker arrived for the planned meeting and found us all already seated on the same side of a table that wasn't there. We went over proxies and documents and what next of kin means when a person has already told you who their next of self is. There was no notarized form in any drawer. There was a page in a notebook and a partner who knew the tiny hairs by the ear that tape should not pull. There was a mother willing to set down a name she had carried like luggage and pick up the one her child handed her like a key. By the 5th day, Marina was breathing room air and the ICU felt too small for her lungs. We moved her to the floor with more windows and fewer machines. Before she left, I cut off her band and looped the printed plastic into the notebook's back pocket. She watched me, amused. "A souvenir?" she asked. "A receipt," I said, "in case anyone tries to charge you the old name again." She laughed then, a sound with edges and warmth. "I'll keep it," she said. "Not because I need proof, because sometimes I like to remember that a fight was won." After her transfer, I walked back into Bed 3's room and saw the old band still on the counter where I'd left it, the letters sharp and certain and wrong. I threw it away without ceremony. Not everything deserves a ritual. 2 weeks later, a postcard arrived at the unit, the kind with too much glitter to be sent by accident. On the back, a line, "You can't know how big it is until someone uses it right." No signature, just a sketch of a hand with careful attention to the knuckles and a name at the top that fit the space it occupied. Names are not decorations. They are directions. In a place where so much is out of a person's control, the least we can do is call them to themselves and meet them there. We tie hands to keep air inside a body. The body doesn't know that. It only knows the sudden urge to pull the thing that feels like drowning out of its throat. Bed 2 was Mr. Ibrahim, day 5 on the ventilator, pneumonia loosening its grip the way stubborn things do slowly, as if embarrassed. His oxygen needs were down. His blood pressure obeyed. The part not behaving was the brain that wakes before the mouth can. He blinked at the ceiling with the stubborn energy of someone who has found the surface and discovered there is still another layer of water on top of it. He reached for the tube twice in the first hour I had him. Not clumsy swats, purposeful, informed grabs. The kind you only see in people who have known machines before and do not plan to be fooled again. On the sedation scale, he hovered at agitated but not violent, like a radio between stations. The delirium screen was positive. The risk of self-extubation was not theoretical. It had the crisp edges of a thing that happens in 3 seconds and makes the next 3 days harder than they needed to be. His wife, Samira, stood at the bedside in a coat too thin for the weather, hands wrapped in each other because there was nowhere else safe to put them. "He will never forgive you if you tie him," she said, voice steady in the way that tells you the words have already been argued in her head and lost. "We use restraints as the last resort," I said, "because that is the sentence the policy prints and also because it is true when you make it true. We try everything else first. Everything else has a list." We dimmed the lights to sane instead of surgical. We opened the blinds so day could be day. We put his glasses on his face, his hearing aid in his ear. We moved the 4 tubing away from his hands so it would stop whispering for attention. We raised the head of the bed, rubbed lotion into fingers that had forgotten their own names, spoke his in a voice calibrated to suggest sure. We asked for a sitter. We paged the physician to review sedation and pain so we weren't tranquilizing fear and under-treating discomfort. We brought a prayer mat from the family room and laid it on the chair like a promise of ordinary life still existing in a nearby room. He reached again. His fingers found the tape at his cheek and pulled it like a loose thread, face turning into effort. I guided his hand back to the blanket. "Mr. Ibrahim, you're safe," I said, which is not always true but is always the right sentence to say to a person trying to breathe through plastic. "Let me hold," Samira said, stepping forward. She took his hands in hers and the line of his shoulders softened, the way bodies recognize other bodies and call off the alarm. "I can be here," she added, "all night. I will not sleep. I will be the one to stop him." I wanted to say yes because love that volunteers needs to be honored. I also wanted to say no because I have watched the clock turn 3 hours into failure on a stranger's face. "For now," I said, "we'll try it your way while we wait for help." Help is a person with a chair and a badge and a tolerance for hours composed of seconds. There was a shortage. Of course, there is always a shortage of the exact thing you need at the exact moment needing becomes visible. 2 hours, the message said. Maybe 3. Time in hospitals is measured in maybes. In the second hour, he croaked around the tube, words reduced to the urge at their core. His hands flexed. Samira's grip slipped. He found the nasogastric tube and yanked it out in one clean, triumphant motion. The wind looked like relief and sounded like a suction canister complaining. I put pressure on his nose to stop the bleeding, apologized to a body that had done exactly what it was built to do, remove foreign things, then apologized to the rest of the plan. "This is why we use mitts," I told Samira, holding up the soft padded gloves that turn hands into gentle objects. "Not to punish. To prevent a grip, they look like punishment," she said. She wasn't wrong. Nothing soft is truly soft in this room. "Can we try them while you stay?" I asked. "We'll reassess every 2 hours. Range his wrists. Check his skin. If he tolerates, we remove them during the day and use them at night when the brain is cruelest. We will write down that this is temporary and exactly why." She took the mitts in her own hands, as if testing for hidden teeth. Then she nodded. "If I stay," she said, "I want to hold him anyway." I slipped the mitts on and guided his hands into hers, 2 padded birds learning they could still be warmed. We restarted a smaller, kinder tube into his nose with his permission written in the language of a blink. We retaped his mouth gently, away from the tiny hairs that make pain out of tape. We adjusted sedation, titrated not to silence but to safety. The sitter arrived 40 minutes before maybe 3 turned into the lie it usually becomes. She took the chair on the far side of the bed and made herself a new piece of furniture, present without becoming part of the storm. At midnight, he woke into panic that broke and ran. I said his name. Samira said his name. The sitter said his name with the tone of someone who has said hundreds of strangers' names and made each one sound like recognition. He stayed. He slept. Morning gave us a window to try less machine and more him. He breathed with the ventilator instead of against it, a truce he had not offered yesterday. We lightened sedation and watched the numbers like a parent pretending not to stare at a toddler's first steps. When his hands lifted, they settled back to the blanket faster. When his eyes opened, they stayed. Can we remove them? Samira asked, nodding at the mitts. We can try, I said, and we did. He tested the absence like a scientist. His hand drifted toward the tape and stopped because her hand intercepted it halfway with a gentle pressure that said, "Not today." He accepted the bargain. For an hour. Then too, we wrote it like weather in the chart, because the forecast for delirium is always conditional. In the afternoon, the physician suggested a spontaneous breathing trial. The respiratory therapist set the machine to help less, watch more. Before we begin, I said to Samira, if he goes for the tube again, the safest thing is for us not you to hold his wrists. It is our job to be the fence. Your job can be to be his ground. She stared at the mitts, then at her own hands, then at his face. He trusts me, she said. He will trust you after this more if we don't ask you to be the wall, I said. I have learned that families forgive the rails of a bed faster than they forgive their own fingers for restraining the person they love. He did well enough that Dare entered the room. Dares are different from decisions. We decided to extubate at the end of the trial while the optimism was honest and the team was present. We explained to Samira what her part would be: voice, touch, the kind of steady a person can borrow. The tube came out and the room became a listener. He coughed. He saw the ceiling without the well at the center. He lifted his hands to his mouth, then dropped them because the thing he needed to remove was gone. He worked at speech, found it halfway, and let the rest happen in his eyes. He cried a little in that efficient way bodies do when nobody is making it a spectacle. Samira pressed her forehead to his temple like a seal that means the paper is now official. Later, he looked at the faint red marks on his wrists with curiosity more than judgment. Did I? He mimicked tugging. You tried to pull what was trying to help, I said. We helped you not succeed. He looked at the mitts, folded now like props in a play after the curtain. I hate them, he said, and then, after a breath, thank you. There is a word you can ask us to say if you get confused again, I added. Something only you and Samira know. When we say it, it might remind you that this is not an attack. He smiled at her. Say our street, he told me. If you say the street, I will remember the front door. We wrote it down where the ventilator settings used to be. We wrote that mitts were night only if needed, sitter in place, reassess each shift, remove at the first safe moment. We wrote the plan to prevent becoming the plan by accident. By discharge to the step-down unit, his wrists had forgotten the mitts and remembered watches. He asked for the time twice an hour like a person trying to collect his life in pieces that click back together. Samira slept for an entire afternoon in a chair and woke up surprised to have survived rest. Before they left, she found me at the desk. You did not make me the jailer, she said. You let me be the person who keeps him. You kept him even when you were tired, I said. We built a fence he couldn't feel. After the transfer, I untied the mitts from the bed and put them away. They looked innocent the way tools do when they're resting. I cleaned the red line the strap had left on the bed rail and thought about the things we bind and why. Restraints restrain us too, from laziness when they are on, from righteousness when they are off. The work is to make the circle smaller every day until it is not a circle anymore, just a hand placed gently over another hand, stopping, and not because you can, but because both of you agree it is the right thing to do. The bedboard glowed the way skies glow before weather changes. It lives on the wall behind the charge nurse, squares of light that mean occupied, cleaning, ready, pending. If you stand in the right place, you can watch relief move like a storm front, an ICU square turning green while an ambulance turns into the bay. Nurses learn not to watch too long. Hope gets superstitious under fluorescent lights. Just before noon, the ED called up with the tone that makes a hallway lean. 2 ventilated patients boarding downstairs and a third coming in by helicopter. A postpartum infection that refused antibiotics, blood pressure losing its patience. We need a bed, the voice said, because need is a number down there, not a sentence. We looked at our 10 rooms and counted the ones that could afford generosity. On paper, Bed 5 was stable enough to flirt with step down. Mr. Duarte, 78, pneumonia retreating by centimeters, vasopressors off for 12 hours, breathing with the ventilator instead of against it. He had done everything the guidelines like to see before you take away the ratio and the screens and the illusion that nothing bad happens when more people are watching. On the whiteboard by his bed, I had written small victories in the tidy handwriting the job teaches you. Sitting up, following commands, nodding in the right places. His daughter, Rosa, hovered at his side with a sweater over her shoulders even though the room was the temperature we keep all rooms when we don't want bodies to sweat or shiver. They promise one more night, she said when I mentioned the step-down team coming to evaluate. We reassess every day, I said carefully. Promises are dangerous furniture. People stub their trust on them. She looked at the ventilator, at the numbers, at her father's cuffed wrist where we had taped on 4 more kindly than the first day. He likes it here, she said, surprising me. No one likes it here, I said gently. He likes that you answer before the second beep, she said. He likes that when he tries to talk, you guess the right word. The intensivist arrived at the door, hands clean, eyes lined with all the beds he'd already visited. We went over the numbers and the trend, the part of medicine that lets you sound like the weather service. Likely, possible, less likely, prepare anyway. He can go, the doctor said. High-flow oxygen upstairs if needed. Close monitoring. We'll keep him on our service for now. Then, softer. We owe Edie a bed. We owe Edie a bed. Not a law, but a gravity. The sickest place in the building was filling with people whose luck had run out this week. We were the upstairs luck. Can I say no? Rosa asked. Do I get a vote? She said it without anger, only the kind of exhaustion that turns sentences into requests your throat knows will be denied. You get a voice, I said, and the plan will include it. I showed her how we would hand him off like a fragile thing that had to keep its shape. Orders for oxygen, alarms that meant something, rescue instructions that use verbs like call and come and intubate if. I wrote our number on the whiteboard and stepped down before he got there. I put my name next to it because sometimes a name makes a line into a bridge. We transferred him after lunch. The step-down nurse met us at the door with eyes that had been busy all day and would be busier now. We're full, she said, which means something different here than it does on a restaurant sign. Full here means each person will try to be more than one person while pretending to be calm. We arranged the lines so they did not trap his hands. We explained his quirks and his daughter's sweater and the fact that he liked to have the blanket folded down at his ankle where it rubbed. We told the night resident what would make us nervous. We set the word delirium like a reminder and the word gentle like a plan. On my way back down the hall, the helicopter announcement overhead made the unit present tense. The postpartum patient would be upstairs within minutes. The bedboard changed a square from pending to ready, and the elevator door hissed open with that cheerfully neutral sound elevators make when the thing inside them is urgent. When the gurney rolled in, the baby wasn't with her. That's how you know a story that will remap a room. Her blood pressure listened to norepinephrine reluctantly. Her kidneys had opinions. Her face was gray where it should have been pink. The obstetrics team followed with seriousness that made people in scrubs a color we don't usually see in the ICU look suddenly like family. Thank you, the ED nurse said as we took the transfer, and it wasn't for the way we took the lines or moved the monitor screen. It was for the bed. By evening, the other ED ventilator had found a home elsewhere, the kind of elsewhere you accept when the perfect place is full. The unit felt the way it does right before night falls, calm like a field that is quiet because the wind is holding its breath. At 8, the step-down nurse called me because sometimes a number dictates the sequence of who you call first. He looks off, she said. Mr. Duarte's oxygen had crept up. His breathing pattern had gone from poem to paragraph, long and unpunctuated. We're at 60% high flow and he's tiring. I went upstairs with the resident, the way you go check on someone who left your house and almost tripped on the sidewalk. Rosa stood at the corner of the bed with the sweater now a shawl. He's working harder, she said, unnecessary but needed. Good families narrate the obvious because it begs to be witnessed. We tried the things we could try there, coaxed him into a position gravity would help, suctioned discreetly, loosened the mask and retightened it the way you do with children's helmets and stubborn jars. The numbers improved and then refused to stay. He looked at me with the kind of trust that is heavier than a body. If he tires more, the resident said, we should move him back. We paged bed control. There is a bed in PACU, the voice said, not apologizing, not gloating. The ICU squares were all red. Board him there with ICU orders until something opens. Rosa listened to our side of the call like a person eavesdropping on fate. So he's going back? She asked, hope and accusation holding hands. We're working on it, I said. And then, yes, because the room deserved a verb. In PACU, the nursing ratio is kind and the lights are cruel. The beds face each other like strangers in an airport lounge. We brought him there with the same careful disrespect for the chaos that we bring to all transfers, lines organized, mask held, fear not invited to lead. The anesthesiologist on duty grinned at me as if we were co-conspirators and said, welcome back to the days when recovery rooms were overflow ICUs. We settled Mr. Duarte and drew up the paperwork to make the chaos legal. Rosa watched me write again. You moved him because you needed the bed, she said, not asking. I moved him because his lungs asked for more hands, I said. Both statements were true. One hurt more. In the middle of that busy quiet, the night intensivist called from downstairs. Our postpartum patient is crashing, he said. We need to intubate and start a second vasopressor. If PACU can keep Mr. Duarte for the night, I can run both. I looked at Mr. Duarte's chest rise, at the way his throat worked under the straps, at Rosa's sweater-collared hope. If he keeps tiring, I said, we'll tube here and bring him down as soon as a bed opens. Rosa closed her eyes for a second. He said he didn't want the tube again if he could help it, she whispered. But he also said he wanted to see the dog one more time. People think decisions are binary until they meet actual life. We tried a steroid boost, a diuretic, small measures that sometimes open doors. We warmed his hands without warming the rest of him. We told his lungs they were allowed to be stubborn and still be safe. They answered with a plateau. Not worse, not better. At midnight, the postpartum patient's numbers looked less like a cliff. The obstetrics team exhaled together, a sound you could feel without hearing if you stood in the doorway. The bedboard mandarins worked their geometry. A transfer from ICU to the floor for another patient, a cleaning crew that sprinted without running, a ready square blinking like a lighthouse. We took Mr. Duarte back to his original room this time, not because rooms have memory, but because people do. He relaxed the way people relax when they are in the place their body has associated with the feeling of being saved. I don't believe in magic, except for that magic. We decreased the oxygen little by little and the curve of his breath settled. Rosa sank into the chair with her sweater like a small house. She did not say, I told you so. She did not need to. In the morning, bed control came by in person, a brave thing when most of your sentences these days make someone upset. Thank you for the flex, he said. We nodded because insult and gratitude both roll off you faster when you are tired. He hovered, then asked the question that recalibrates rooms. Do you want me to be there when you talk to the family about what happened last night? We'll talk, I said. The apology was mine to deliver. Not for the transfer, there was reason and logic and medicine in it, but for the part where we let the decisions look like they had more to do with the board than with the person. Transparency is a kind of pain that saves you from worse pain later. We explained it to Rosa over lukewarm coffee. We told her about the ED, about a young mother whose blood pressure had been a string held by too many hands. We admitted we had moved fast for reasons that were not only her father. We told her we had moved him back as fast, for reasons that were only her father. We gave her the numbers and then we gave her the human piece, which is harder to carry but weighs less over time. I don't want to be the person who thinks my dad is more important than someone else, she said. I just don't want to be the person who was told one more night and then watched the bed disappear. That was our mistake, I said. We don't promise nights. We promise to watch. We promise to come when the alarms are real. We promise to move him to the safest place available, even if it means moving him again when the definition of safest changes. She folded her hands around the cup and let the heat make its case. He does breathe easier here, she said, which wasn't a complaint or a demand. It was a data point with feelings attached. We kept him 2 more days, then tried again, slower. We stepped him to high flow during the day and ICU at night, a bargain with the body and the board. He behaved. On the 3rd morning, he moved upstairs for real, not at a tour but a destination. Rosa carried the sweater draped over the 4-pole like banner and blanket. He waved with the hand that didn't have the pulse ox. When they passed the board, I watched Rosa look at it the way people look at a map after they've reached the place they were trying to find interest in. Now that the danger is memory. How do you not let this make decisions you should make? She asked, more curious than accusing. We let it speak, I said. We don't let it vote. A week later, the postpartum patient came back through on her way to the floor, hair washed, smile that made the unit taller. Someone had put a photo of a baby on her tray table, a reminder of the person the bed had been for. Mr. Duarte sent a note down with the transporter, a list of television channels he liked for the step-down nights, a drawing of a dog that looked more like a potato with legs, thank you written in patient block letters that borrowed the shape of our wristband font. Beds in hospitals are not furniture, they are verbs. You occupy, you board, you transfer, you downgrade, you upgrade, you return. We borrow them from the person who will need them tomorrow. We keep them clean in the meantime. We try to give them back with the sheets still warm. The board on the wall kept glowing, evenings into mornings into a week that did not ask permission before becoming hard. I stopped watching it directly. I watched the rooms instead, whose numbers softened, whose hands unclenched, who needed more of us and who needed us to get out of the way. Fairness, it turns out, is not a color on a dashboard. It's a series of explanations delivered before the rumor of them grows teeth. It's a bed given to the right body at the right time and a different kind of bed given to the person who has already used up their share of machines for the day. On my break, I found a sticky note on the staff fridge. When in doubt, narrate your reasons, the charge nurse had written in messy capitals. We owe people more than decisions. We owe them the story of how we chose. The door to bed 8 looks like every other door. The difference is the list behind it. Medications have a schedule. Visitors have a map. Some names open, some names close. We don't write that on the whiteboard. We carry it in our pockets like a second set of keys. She arrived from the ED at dawn with a chest tube and a story she kept under her tongue. Miss Cheng, 32, rib fractures like tally marks, a small pneumothorax that hissed its way toward a bang, oxygen low but coachable. Alert on and off through the morphine, oriented in the way people are when they can still name the city but not the day. The triage note had a square check that you learn to recognize even without the words beside it. No information, no visitors. Ask patient. An hour later, while I was changing her dressing, she found the shore between waves of pain and said, "No one please." She blinked. "Except my sister. If she comes, she'll know the password. Do you want a password?" I asked. "We have a policy and a box to check. We also have a ritual that makes it easier to honor both." She nodded. "Orchid, orchid," I repeated, because repetition is a kind of signature when a pen is too heavy. She swallowed, then added, "If a man named Evan asks, even if he says Fiank, even if he cries no." She pressed her thumb to the sheet where it bunched near her hip. "I will say more later. Not yet. Not yet is a full sentence in the ICU. I put the chart on no info status, which looks like rudeness from the hallway and like safety from the room. I wrote orchid where only staff could see, in letters tall enough to climb. I told the charge nurse. I told security. I told myself, be a door that can open and still be a wall. At 9, The phone at the desk rang with the first piece of the story pretending to be logistics. I'm calling about Leela, the voice said too quickly. Room, who is calling? Her fianc, a breath. Evan, I have no one by that name, I said, which is what the policy demands and what the room deserved. He hung up with the click of a person who will come in person. Miss Cheng dozed and woke and dozed again. The chest tube bubbled and then learned not to. She would squeeze my fingers when a cough threatened, and I would squeeze back as if I could hold the pain for her. When I asked if she wanted me to call her sister for her, she shook her head. I texted, she murmured, before the rest. She didn't describe the rest, I didn't ask. Some stories need more oxygen than a room can give on the first day. At 10, he arrived with a bouquet that had not wilted yet. Men who carry flowers often assume they are holding a key. I'm here for my fiancé, he said to the volunteer, who had already been briefed and who sent him to me with a look I recognized as both apology and solidarity. Name? I asked. Evan, he said. You must be the nurse. Thank you. She's not good with hospitals. I always help her understand things. I'll go back with you. She's on a no-visitor status, I said. He blinked slowly, surprised not by the words but by the fact that I meant them. You don't understand. I'm her fianc. I make her decisions when she's scared. She's not confused, I said. She told us who could visit. He held up the bouquet as if it could barter. I'm on her insurance. So is the hospital, I said, before I could think better of it. He exhaled a laugh without humor. You're being hostile, he said. I'm trying to help. You can leave the flowers, I said. If she changes her mind, we'll let you know. He leaned closer, dropped his voice the way people do when they want to sound reasonable and instead drive the temperature of a hallway up. She has panic attacks. She says things she doesn't mean. I'm the one who calms her down. He smiled the way you smile at a dog before you decide to leash it. Be flexible. It is a strange thing to be called inflexible by a room full of machines that only operate on numbers within ranges. I'm following her instructions, I said. You can call later. He didn't raise his voice. He called security. He asked for a supervisor. He told the volunteer I was difficult and told the clerk I was obstructing care and told himself probably that I was a problem to be solved with a different door. The charge nurse appeared at my shoulder without my having paged her. Good charge nurses do that. She repeated the sentence that keeps a hospital honest. We honor the patient's preference. He left the flowers so violently that a few petals surrendered in midair. Tell her, he said, that I came. I wrote that down too. The notebook of the day holds more than medication times. At noon, her sister appeared with a tote bag and a face that named itself tired before we exchanged actual names. Orchid, she said softly. She did not test me with the word. She offered it the way you offer a handshake. I checked the bracelet and the chart, invited her in, and watched her sit in the chair and rehearse a sentence. People rehearse when truth is too heavy to carry in one trip. She told me last week, the sister said, after we updated on numbers and tubes, that she was filing, that she had a plan. I thought she would wait until, she gestured at the chest tube. I should have been there. She made good choices this morning, I said. She asked for you, the sister cried then, quietly, like a person paying a bill. She stroked the blanket where the curve of Leela's knee made a hill. She'll want her glasses, she said. She'll want a sweater from the bottom drawer, the green one with the missing cuff. We set the password on the room phone. We turned her chart to an alias so the operator could tell the truth, no one by that name, without lying. We taped a small paper to the desk with names that entered and names that did not, the way you tape a reminder above a crib that says back to sleep so exhaustion doesn't invent exceptions. Evan called 8 more times that shift under different names. He asked for room 8 and the Asian girl and the one with the chest tube and Leela with an L as in love. Sometimes he said please. Sometimes he said you'll be liable. He asked to speak to the doctor. He asked to speak to anyone else. I wrote each call under my vitals. He walked by once, fast, discussing my fiancé loudly into his phone just outside the unit doors where the sign says no cell phones and means nothing. Security eased him away from our entrance and toward gravity. In the afternoon, Miss Cheng was awake enough to hold a cup of ice water and write the letter O and then a shaky K on the small board. Pain? I asked, and she shook her head. Visitor, she shook again. Her sister showed her the flowers he had left. She closed her eyes and opened them with a look I have only ever seen on people who are certain of a thing under their own ribs and unsure of it in other people's hands. If she wants a full no-contact order, we can help, the social worker said during rounds. She kept her voice at eye level, not above anyone's head. If she wants something less, we build that. It doesn't have to be all or nothing today. Not today, miss. Cheng breathed, and the social worker nodded like a teacher whose lesson plan includes a new word, agency. Night shifted in with its usual math. Fewer bodies, more shadows, machines louder because they have less competition. Evan returned with a man whose badge had a shield on it, the kind of friend people produce when they want to skip a line. The officer stood at the desk and asked if Alila was here. I can't confirm, I said. We're on no information status. If you have paperwork, we can take it to legal. He looked annoyed not to have been the exception. Exceptions are the currency of people who hate rules. He asked if he could just peek. No, the charge nurse said, and we both smiled because we work well when we are a wall with two voices. Back in the room, Miss Cheng watched numbers climb and fall like timid hikers. She was quieter when the door was closed. She told her sister two sentences about last night and then changed the subject to the soup in the tote bag. I counted her breaths with my hand on the curve of her back like a metronome. The room didn't need us to narrate safety. It needed us to make it. In the morning, we trialed her on less oxygen and more herself. She stood with physical therapy as if remembering the outline of her own legs. When she sat again, she looked at me. I'm ready to talk, she said, which is one of the bravest sentences a body can make while still taped together. We sat with the social worker and a cup of tea that fooled no one. She said the words restraining order and cycle and leaving is a process. Miss Cheng said, I want him off the list forever. She said, I want my sister to hear everything first. She said, can you make the hospital lie and say I was never here for the rest of the week? We can make the hospital say nothing, I said. And we can make the hospital say your alias. I wrote it again, larger, in a place no one photographs. That afternoon, Evan tried the front desk downstairs. He tried the gift shop, asked if anyone had bought a stuffed animal that looked like something Leela would like. He tried the ED again, where they told him to stop trying. He tried to be reasonable. He tried to be clever. He tried to be a mirror in which we would see a version of him that deserved to be inside the door. We declined. On day 3, Miss Cheng moved from percentages of oxygen to liters you can count on one hand. She ate soup that had learned how to be soup again in a microwave. We walked her around the unit in slow laps that people call victory when what they mean is practice. Her sister brought the green sweater. We hid the missing cuff under the blanket. She asked for her phone and then handed it back to her sister without unlocking it. Not yet, she said. Later, she asked for a piece of paper and wrote down orchid in careful block letters with a small underline that looked like a root. I called legal to make the no-contact part official within our walls. Security added his photo to the list of faces that trigger a call. The visitor policy is a boring document until it becomes the exact document you need to make a room feel like a room instead of a train station. Before transfer to the floor, Miss Cheng asked me to cut her wristband and replace it with one that matched the alias. I know the scan matters, she said. I just want all the words to agree. We printed a new band and slid it on. I handed her the old one. A receipt, I said. She smiled at that. Small and tired and certain. Keep it, she said. Put it in whatever box you keep for days like this. Maybe someday another nurse needs proof that a boundary worked. On the floor, they arranged a room far from the elevators and a note that did not say why. The sister taped the password next to the call light where no one but staff would see. The attending wrote no information again because the first time shouldn't have to do all the work. The social worker walked her through what would happen when the hospital wasn't around to be the wall. None of it was simple. All of it was possible. A week later, a card came back to our unit in an envelope with no return address. Inside, a photo of an orchid that had won a small ribbon at a fair and a line in tidy print, "Thank you for refusing what I was not ready to refuse for myself." No signature. No need. We refuse visitors for many reasons in the ICU flu season, staffing, midnight. This refusal was a different kind of medicine. People think care is measured in what we bring into a room. Fluids, facts, hands. Sometimes it is measured in what we keep out. Research dresses like help. It carries a clipboard that looks like authority and a consent form that looks like permission. On our unit, it also carries a clock. Most trials come with windows you can fit a life through only if the hallway clears. Bed 1 arrived from the ED at 10:37 a.m. Vasopressor running like a leash, fever that had forgotten how to be a symptom and decided to become a climate. Mr. Patel, 61, lungs full of a story we would later call pneumonia because names make plans easier. The resident rattled off labs and we built the usual scaffolding. Cultures, broad antibiotics, careful fluids, a ventilator ready to be invited if his breathing stopped being brave. At 11:05, Maya from research appeared in the doorway with the polite urgency of someone who knows the rules and the exceptions to the rules and is trying not to weaponize either. "He meets criteria," she said, voice low. Sepsis protocol trial. Randomized. Both arms within standard of care. Extra blood draws. Follow-up after discharge. 6-hour enrollment window. His wife sat in the chair that makes everyone look like a child for the first 10 minutes. Their son stood behind her with his hand on the backrest, a posture that pretends to be casual and is actually ballast. I felt the pull, the instinct to say not now, to protect them from verbs that asked for signatures while adrenaline was still leading, and the counter instinct that the future person who would benefit from what we learn is not here to argue for themselves. Research is a conversation between this room and a room we will meet next year. "I can wait," Maya said, correctly reading the air. But not all day. We stabilized what could be stabilized. His pressure agreed to be reasonable with the norepinephrine's help. His oxygen climbed into the range where numbers stopped being bullies. He slipped in and out of that odd, watery consciousness that looks like someone listening from the next room. When the storm had edges instead of fog, we asked if we could talk. "This is not treatment we can't give without a study," I said, because the first duty is to clean the words before you hand them to people. It's two ways of doing something we already do, compared in a careful way. Either path is acceptable. We don't know which is better. That's why there's a trial. Does he get placebo? The son asked, skeptical in the way that protects families from being sold things. "No," Maya said. "Everyone gets antibiotics, fluids, medicine to support blood pressure if needed. The difference is timing and amounts decided by a computer that flips a fair coin. He may have some extra blood tests, and we'll call after he leaves to see how he's doing. If you say yes, you can say no later, and his care won't change." "What do you get?" the wife asked, looking at me, not Maya. "I don't get anything," I said. "The unit doesn't get money for saying yes. If there are any costs, the study covers them. If you say no, we keep treating him the same way." She closed her eyes the way people pray without admitting it. "What does he get if we say yes?" "A chance to help someone we won't meet," Maya said softly. "And maybe a way of doing things that ends up being better, for him or for someone else. We truly don't know yet, then why do it?" The son pressed. "Because not knowing is not neutral," I said. "When we're unsure, people assume the way they were taught is best. Trials test our habits." He looked at his father, at the lines and the machine that kept the numbers honest, at the way breath can be both automatic and heroic. "I hate that you are asking," he said. "I also hate the idea that his suffering teaches nothing. We gave them time that wasn't really time, it was 10 minutes with the door closed. When they opened it, Mrs. Patel held the pen like a verdict. "We'll do it," she said, and I saw the relief of deciding settle on her face. Not because the choice was easy, because it was made. Randomization put him in the usual care arm, which meant we kept doing what we had already begun, with extra labs that would add another bruise to a forearm already learning purple. His wife laughed once, a sound edged with disappointment and relief. "So he joined a study to do what he was going to do anyway," she said. "That's how we learn if the anyway is the best way," Maya said. She left, promising to return with the study blood tubes and something like gratitude that didn't pretend to be cheer. For the first day, the lines and the numbers behaved. Mr. Patel drifted. He squeezed his wife's fingers on command and lifted his eyebrows at jokes that weren't good enough to deserve him. The son asked precise questions that made interns stand up straighter. We filled the whiteboard with times to anchor the way days evaporate in rooms like this. On the second morning, the lab called with a hemoglobin that had dropped enough to make the resident's eyebrows change shape. There was blood seeping around his central line dressing, not drama, just the kind of persistent that makes you worry about the math. We checked everywhere blood can hide. We found nothing that explained the number. The resident ordered repeats. We held our breath with professional faces. "What changed?" the son asked. "Is it because of the study?" "No," I said, "because the arms did not include medication that touches bleeding. Sepsis changes how blood behaves. Lines can ooze. We watch. We adjust. It is one thing to tell the truth. It is another to watch it be insufficient." His wife nodded in the way people nod to stay upright. The son didn't nod at all. He stared at the research tubes in their rack, at the clipboard with the boxes that had been checked, at the word voluntary printed under a paragraph that might as well be written in fog. "If we withdraw," he said, calm in the way anger feels just before it decides to be useful, "does anything change?" "The extra blood draw stop," Maya said, who had appeared when called and stood with her hands visible, not defensive. "We'll keep the data we've already collected to help understand what happened." But nothing about his care changes because of saying no. Mrs. Patel's gaze flicked between us, a metronome for a decision that should have been made in a quieter room. "I don't want him to teach anything today," she said. "I just want him to get better. That is allowed," Maya said, and I loved her a little for that sentence, and also hated the situation that made it necessary. They withdrew. We removed the extra labels from the lab slips and disabled the research order set. The resident readied the dressing with the care of a person binding a book whose pages mattered. We adjusted things that could explain the bleed, the anticoagulation from the lines, the tiny war between sepsis and clotting factors. The numbers stopped falling. The room exhaled. The next day, Mr. Patel was more present in the way that makes everyone on rounds use the word encouraging without superstition. He shook his head when asked if he wanted the TV on and then said music through lips that had forgotten what a consonant can do. We put on something his son chose that sounded like a kitchen on a Sunday. He slept with his mouth less open. Maya returned anyway, not to re-recruit, but to check on them because good researchers remember that participant and patient are sometimes the same human and sometimes not. She apologized for the timing, for the extra tubes, for the way the clipboard enters rooms whose air is already thin. She didn't apologize for the idea of the trial. You don't apologize for trying to make the future kinder. On day 4, we trialed him on less vasopressor and more himself. His blood pressure agreed to stand without our hand on its shoulder. We talked about getting him out of bed, the sacred act that turns data back into a person. When he sat at the edge of the mattress, eyes bright with effort, Mrs. Patel put her palm flat against his back the way you do when you hold a toddler steady without insulting them. He stood, shuffled 3 steps, and cried because his legs remembered their job. By the end of the week, the ventilator was negotiating itself out of a job. We removed the tube, we coached him through the cough, we watched his chest discover it could be its own engine again. He drank ice water and called it delicious as if ice had invented itself overnight. When we transferred him to the step-down unit, the study was a line in his chart followed by a line that said withdrawn at family request. I wrote the date, the time, the name of the person who said no, not because anything depended on that detail, but because someday someone would read the note and need to know that the door had a handle on the inside. 2 weeks later, a letter came from the research office addressed to the family. It thanked them for considering, for enrolling, for withdrawing, for letting their moment of fear be part of a map even if only the first square of it ended up colored in. No guilt, no sales pitch, just the quiet grammar of respect. Mrs. Patel came back to the unit by accident. She took the wrong elevator on her way to pick up discharge paperwork. She found me at the desk and stood the way people stand when they're not sure they're allowed to enter a room that used to own them. He's home, she said, placing the words like fragile dishes on a shelf. He tires easily. He says the tea tastes different. He keeps the walker like a pet. She hesitated, then added, I'm glad we said yes first. And I'm glad we said no later. Is that allowed? It is the definition of allowed, I said. Both are the point. Back at bed 1, a new patient had taken the space Mr. Patel left. A different trial was recruiting for a different uncertainty, a different coin to be flipped with the blessing of a family that would have preferred not to be asked anything harder than milk or sugar. I checked the supplies, the consent forms, the spare tubes, the folder with the versions of the document in languages that turn fear into something a human can parse. We offer trials here because medicine must learn without guessing. We offer them badly when we sell hope and well when we admit we are curious on purpose. We honor the no the same way we honor the yes. Most days, the work is holding the clipboard and the hand in the same room without letting one feel heavier than the other. At the bottom of the consent form, below the signature line and the date, there is always a sentence about the right to withdraw at any time without penalty. We read it out loud because people forget black ink can be a promise in both directions. I have started adding a sentence of my own when families ask why we even bring research into rooms that already hum. I tell them that someone else made a room like theirs easier for us, sometime before this morning, by letting us compare 2 decent ways of helping. And when they ask me what I would do if it were my father, I tell the truth they deserve. I don't know. Not until it is my hallway and my clock and my pen. But I hope I would remember that saying yes doesn't remove the right to say no, that learning something for strangers is not the same as being used. That there will be a nurse who cares more about their breathing than about a publication, and a researcher who cares more about the integrity of the question than about the number of signatures collected before lunch. We offered the trial. They offered an answer. We kept caring either way. That is the deal, written and unwritten, on the doors of a place that is trying to be the future without forgetting how to sit in the present and hold a cup of melted ice like a victory. By the time the sun figured out our windows, the decision had already been made in a smaller room. The neuro team had talked with the family. The scans said what blunt images always say, what isn't coming back? He was 28. His mother wrapped both hands around a paper cup as if cups could volunteer for hard jobs. His father sat very straight, the posture of a person holding in a tide. His sister spoke most of the words because sometimes the youngest can lift what the oldest cannot. They chose donation after circulatory death. The surgeon's language was precise. Ours had to be simpler. We explained the sequence without selling hope. Comfort first, then a walk to the operating room, then we remove the breathing tube while his family is near enough to be his horizon. If his breath fades and his heart stops within the time needed, other teams will step in to do their work. If he keeps breathing, we bring him back to the ICU or to a quiet floor room and keep doing what we do when the only medicine left is attention. Either way, no suffering. Either way, no hurry that belongs to anyone but him. Will it hurt? His mother asked. We will not let it, I said. We will be beside him the whole way. He had a name that fit his face. We wrote it everywhere it needed to live, on the new wristband, on the whiteboard, on the handoff sheet I would carry in a pocket that also carried mints and tape and pens. In the chart, another field asked for legal next of kin. Another asked for religion. Another asked for yes or no to the question we were navigating. Paperwork behaves as if grief has checkboxes. We kept our voices human. We spent the morning undoing the room's old habits. The alarms were silenced to a volume that respected the work of saying goodbye. Drips that convinced blood pressure to pretend were discontinued. Morphine and midazolam replaced them like quieter, kinder colleagues showing up for a late shift. We cleaned tape from the corners of his mouth so his mother could kiss his cheek without tasting the glue. We shaved a small stubborn patch so nothing tugged. We switched the monitor from the full parade to a single line. We turned away from the family. Numbers do not need to narrate the end. A liaison from the organ procurement team arrived with a binder dignified by use, not by shine. She spoke gently and clearly, answerable and unafraid to say, "I don't know," where the truth was not ours. She asked what music he liked. The sister said he had a playlist for cooking. We found it on a phone with a cracked corner, 2 songs deep into a queue that knew its job. In the early afternoon, the hallway changed its posture. Word travels the way gravity does, it needs no announcement. Respiratory therapy checked the ventilator and then checked nothing, because the goal had become comfort. The anesthesiologist came up from the or to introduce himself to a family he would later not speak to during the part the public doesn't see. The attending went over the pronouncement steps. A stethoscope and a clock, minutes counted by someone who would rather count anything else. There would be 5 minutes of no heart activity, the quietest minutes in medicine. We told the family we would tell them what we were doing before we did it, and then we practiced in our heads so the words would arrive in the right order. We asked about an honor walk. We don't name it that on the unit because naming things makes them official in a way that invites arguments about when and who and how. We just ask if the family would like people to stand in the hall when he goes by. The mother loved the idea and immediately apologized for loving it. "I want him seen," she said. "I want him more than numbers, more than bed 4. He is," I said. "We know." Before the transport, I took out the last 4 that wasn't needed for comfort and cleaned the place it had occupied. No tape marks to outlive their purpose. I straightened the sheet, changed the pillowcase to the one without the wrinkle that bothers cheeks. I asked his father if he wanted to help with anything. He nodded, grateful to be assigned a task that didn't convert grief into an audience. He held the corners of the blanket while I tucked, the way people do when they are making a bed for someone they love to climb into after a hard day. I told him he was good at it. He said he had practiced for years, and we both let that sit between us like a fact that required no reply. When it was time, we moved slowly. The ventilator hissed like a polite reminder. Nurses from other rooms stepped into the hallway and made themselves into a quiet corridor. Housekeeping stopped and placed a hand over a heart before resuming a cart's motion. No one told her to do that. Security stood back far enough to be furniture. Someone from dietary leaned out of a doorway and then stepped all the way out, chin lifted in something like salute. The elevator opened and for once we did not resent its timing. The mother walked with one hand on the rail of the bed and one hand on his shoulder. The sister walked on the other side, holding the playlist phone, volume low enough that the song felt like it belonged to him alone. The father stayed at the head, where fathers go when they want to watch the face as it passes from one room to another. I walked behind, a small cart with the medications we would use, the syringes labeled in my own handwriting because I trust my own letters. The liaison walked beside me, her binder balanced against her hip, familiar with the choreography that makes a hallway wider. In the operating room, the lights are too bright for goodbye, so we did the goodbye in the small space before the double doors. We checked names again not because we didn't know them but because ritual protects you from wondering later whether you missed the thing that matters. We explained to the family where they would stand. They did not nod because nodding suggests agreement, and this was not something to agree to. It was something to bear. The anesthesiologist introduced the possibility of stepping out for the very last moments, then immediately introduced the permission to stay if that was what love needed to look like. They stayed. The tube came out with the kind of humility I wish all devices practiced at the end. He breathed on his own for a time that belonged only to him. His father kept a hand on his shoulder, ready to absorb any flinch and met none. His mother pressed the corner of a cloth to the place where saliva collected and then smiled at herself for needing to do something to make something look more like him. The sister watched the rise and fall and whispered almost inaudible suggestions. The way you coax a child to sleep when the child is already mostly asleep. The clock saw everything. We did not. We watched a face. When his chest stopped trying, the room found a new kind of quiet. The physician listened where a heart should announce itself and wrote down the times that now mean more than they seem. We waited the minutes we had promised to wait, minutes that move with their own physics. No one asked if we were finished. We were not. We were doing the part where we bear witness to the absence as carefully as we had borne witness to the presence. Only when the time passed did the liaison nod to the teams beyond the drape. We stepped back without vanishing. We said we loved him without saying those words out loud. Back upstairs, his room was already a different country. The bedboard had changed color because boards have a job, and jobs do not pause for ritual. The charge nurse had turned the lights to afternoon and opened the blinds to a sky that could not possibly know. Housekeeping waited for a signal. There are things you learn to do slowly. We stripped the bed, wiped the tape shadow from the guardrail, gathered the last of his belongings into a clear bag that did not deserve to be clear. I folded the gown he had worn and placed it on the chair his mother had occupied as if folding could make time tidy. The family came back to the unit with a different weight in their arms. They thank people the way you thank someone who stood in a place you could not stand alone. The mother asked if she could see his room once more. We let her, and she reached for the whiteboard and erased the day of the week because it didn't seem correct to leave it there. I wrote his name on an index card and handed it to her like a receipt for a thing we could never charge. She put it in her pocket with the practiced motion of a person who will find it later and feel proof. In the afternoon lull that follows a noon that broke something, we debriefed the way units do. A few chairs at the back, someone's tea cooling, someone else's mask tucked under a chin. We said the easy things first. Thank you for the walk, good job with the line, I appreciate the way you explained the 5 minutes out loud. Then we said the things that matter more. I hated that the elevator took that long. I loved the way his father tucked the blanket. I do not know how to stand still in hallways like that without feeling like a fraud, and I am going to keep standing anyway. After dinner trays, a different bed needed something only we could give. Another family waited for a doctor with news measured in adjectives. Stable, guarded, encouraging. I printed a new interpreter number and taped it to the phone because language is still a vital sign tomorrow. I corrected a banner name in another chart because names were not inventions of last week. I scribbled, when in doubt, narrate your reasons on the corner of the staff whiteboard again, not because people forget but because remembering fights gravity. Before I left, I walked once more past the doors that had opened for him. The hallway looked like every hallway again. That's how hospitals protect themselves from drowning. They return to ordinary on purpose. Still, if you looked closely, you could see a scuff where a stretcher wheel turned a little too tight, and a flower petal that had escaped the bouquet someone pressed into his mother's hands, and a shadow of a line where we'd stood. Evidence is small like that. It hides where cleaning doesn't think to wipe. We say that donation is a gift. It is. It is also a handover. Not from one person to another, though that is the story you read. From a life that has given what it can in this body to a set of strangers who may live differently because of him. We are not the heroes in that sentence. We are the witnesses and the translators and the people who keep time honestly. On my way out, the bedboard glowed its weather. There were greens where there had been reds. There would be reds by morning. The elevator was slow, then fast, then right on time. I thought about all the rooms this week. the phone held up like a shield that turned back into a notebook. The interpreter who made a daughter 14 years old again. The wristband we reprinted to match the person in the bed. The mitts we used, then removed. The transfer that hurt less once it was explained. The door we kept closed and the man we kept on the other side. The clipboard that offered a yes and an equal right to a no. Every one of those decisions had asked for a kind of courage. None of them asked for applause. At home, when the kettle clicked, the sound reminded me of the monitor's last long tone, and I let the memory pass through without deciding whether it was allowed. Between two heartbeats there is a space. We keep filling it with language that tries to be precise, with hands that try to be steady, with rules we try to make kinder than they were when we first learned them. Today, that space held a family walking beside a bed and a floor of people turning a corridor into a promise. Tomorrow we will start again. The work ends in rooms like his and continues in 1,000 unknown ones. The gift is both. The witness is us.